I swear on everything holy that this actually happened on Halloween night when I was 15. My friends Jenny and Liam and I were having a sleepover at Jenny's house. Her parents were out at some boring neighbourhood costume party, and the house was huge and quiet, just the way we liked it. We were supposed to be watching scary movies, but we got bored of the predictable jump scares. It was just past 11:30 PM, and Liam, trying to be edgy, suggested we try and summon something. We looked up a few rituals, but they all seemed too complicated. So Liam said, "Let's invent our own. It'll be safe because we made the rules." We called it the Midnight Knock. The rules were simple: turn off every light, lock every door and window in the house, sit in a circle in the completely dark living room, and exactly at midnight, we would chant, "We are home, you may enter," and wait for a knock. The only sacred rule was that under no circumstances were we allowed to move, speak, or open the door until 1 AM. If we did, we were told whatever entered would have permanent access to us. We secured every lock, triple-checked the basement door, and sat down in the absolute smothering darkness. The air in the room got thick, almost heavy, as midnight approached. The only sound was the far-off, cheerful sound of a passing siren and the frantic, nervous chatter of our own breathing. Then, the clock on Liam's phone hit 12 AM. We mumbled the chant quickly, "We are home, you may enter," and the silence that followed was suffocating. For a full minute, nothing. We were about to burst out laughing at our own stupidity when it came. A single, polite, distant from the front door. We froze, our eyes wide in the dark, trying to decide if it was a final, late trick-or-treater. But then, the knocking moved. It wasn't the front door anymore. There was a slow from the kitchen, followed by a lighter scratching tap directly above us in the upstairs hallway. Our blood ran cold. The creature wasn't at the door, it was already in the house. The cheap, battery-operated LED pumpkin candle on the mantelpiece began to flicker rapidly, throwing grotesque, moving shadows on the walls. Even though it was completely disconnected from the power, we were paralysed, staring at the flickering light, unable to break the rule and run. The true, stomach-dropping horror started when a heavy, desperate pounding began on the basement door. The one we had checked and locked ourselves, just 6 feet behind Jenna. The pounding was fierce and rhythmic, accompanied by a sickening, wet scraping sound that sounded exactly like fingernails being dragged across the painted wood. Liam, terrified, whispered, "It's trying to come up." But as we sat there, huddled together, we realised something truly chilling. The pattern of padding was perfectly mirroring our own panicked heartbeats, accelerating and slowing as our fear surged. The intensity was so violent that a fine layer of white plaster dust began to drift down from the ceiling above us. When the clock on Liam's phone finally reached 1 AM, the pounding, the scraping, and the flickering light all stopped instantaneously. The silence returned, but this time it was profound and absolute. We flipped on the lights and scrambled to the basement door. The air around the door was freezing. On the inside of the door, where the latch was, there were 3 long, deep gouges scraped into the solid wood, marks that ran vertically from the centre down to the floor, too high up to be a child, and impossible for us to have made. Whatever answered our silly game was a prisoner down there, and for an hour they had been fighting to get out and find us. We never played a game like that again. The rule for our Halloween sleepover was simple: best costume wins bragging rights for the year. This year, there were 4 of us: myself, Ben, Justin and Noah. We were all competitive, going for full gore and effects. My basement was decked out with cobwebs and fake blood, perfect for the atmosphere. Everyone showed up looking amazing, except for Noah. Noah was the quietest one of the group, and he showed up late, around 10 PM. The moment he walked into the basement, the energy died. His costume was too good. He was a victim of a car wreck, but it wasn't props. It looked generally disturbing, melted skin effects, deeply bruised and blackened colouring, and a deeply unsettling, distended jaw piece that looked like broken porcelain. He just stood there, completely silent, in the corner by the old pool table, staring straight ahead. When we asked him to come play video games, he just slightly shook his head. We kept joking with him, trying to get him to loosen up, but he wouldn't talk. "Seriously, Noah, you win," Ben said, laughing nervously. "Now, take off the mask, man, it's creepy." Noah only responded with that slight head shake, his silence now feeling aggressive. It got under my skin, and around 2 AM, fueled by too much soda and fear, I decided to end the awkwardness. I marched over to him, grabbed the neck of the costume and said, "Alright, enough's enough," and pulled up hard, intending to rip the mask off his head. But the mask didn't come off. Instead, a sickening tearing sound, like wet leather being ripped, filled the room. I stumbled back, horrified, as a dark, oily, metallic smelling fluid began to seep out from under the neck of the costume, staining my carpet. We all gasped, realizing the edges of the mask weren't just latex seams, they were connected to his body. When I looked closely, I saw thick, black sutures, like fishing wire, stitching the costume directly into his real skin around his throat and his fingertips. The eyes behind the holes were wide, milky white, and completely unblinking. They were fixed in a terrifying vacant stare. That was not Noah looking back at us. Panic seized us. We screamed and grabbed our phones to call for help, but every single phone showed no signal. It was like the room had been cut off from the world. We backed away towards the stairs, terrified of the stitched figure in the corner. Then, its body began to twitch violently, a series of sharp, uncontrolled spasms. The horrific jaw piece of the mask slowly opened, not revealing human teeth, but something far worse. Dozens of tiny, shimmering black beetle-like insects that crawled and swarmed inside the cavity, clicking against the plastic. It wasn't breathing, but the collective sound of the insects was loud and horrifying. The figure stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural, its head tilted, nauseating angle. It took a slow, deliberate step towards us, the click, click, click of the beetle mouth growing louder with every footfall. We bolted, not bothering to turn off the lights or lock the doors. We ran through the empty streets until we found a neighbour who called the police. When the police searched the house, they found the basement empty. No Noah, no costume, only a large, oily stain on the carpet. We never saw Noah again, and his family only gave vague, contradictory answers about his whereabouts. But we know one thing for certain. Whatever that was, it wore Noah to our sleepover. This happened at a Halloween sleepover when I was 16. It's not a ghost story with chains and moans, it's a modern kind of horror that feels much more intrusive. My friends, Sam, Maya and I were having a sleepover at my apartment. We were too cool to trick or treat, so we were just hanging out, watching the last of the costume kids outside. To entertain ourselves, we found an old, dusty analog baby monitor in the back of the closet. The receiver unit was huge and bulky, the kind with the static antennae. Our plan was stupid. We set up the small microphone unit pointing out of my bedroom window, hoping to pick up funny or embarrassing conversations by the stragglers outside. We plugged the receiver in and started messing with the frequency dial. Instead of clear voices from the street, The monitor crackled, then settled on a strange, low-fidelity signal. It wasn't coming from outside, it was picking up an interior room, accompanied by a faint, echoing sound of a music box playing a broken, repeating lullaby. It was creepy but intriguing. The screen showed a dark, empty corner of a room, dimly lit by a flickering yellow streetlight. We were fascinated. We had accidentally taped into some stranger's private space. We sat watching the corner, making up stories about who lived there, until we realised the camera had picked up movement. A small, dirty, pale hand appeared in the frame, trembling slightly. It was clearly a child's hand, and it was slowly, deliberately pointing a grubby finger directly at the monitor's camera lens. The music box melody stuttered, and a distorted, chilling whisper cut through the static. "Why are you watching us?" We all screamed and jumped back, terrified. Sam immediately lunged for the monitor to turn it off, but the volume knob was jammed solid. We couldn't move it. The whisper returned, much louder this time, no longer asking a question, but an accusation. It began to distinctly call out each of our names, one after the other, distorted and full of malice. "Maya, Sam, Alex." The static on the screen intensified, the image of the dark room disappearing completely, replaced by a searing white noise. Then, in a sickering flash of colour, a single, horrific image flashed into view. A close-up, wide-eyed face of a pale child, pressed so tightly against the camera lens that its features were distorted and huge. It lasted only a second, but it was burned into our minds. We finally managed to rip the battery out of the receiver, killing the sound and the light. We sat in silence for a moment, hearts pounding, then slowly crept back to the window, feeling immensely relieved. We looked across the street, trying to figure out which house the signal had come from. To our absolute horror, the house we suspected was completely dark, silent, and covered in grime. Most of the windows were boarded up by old plywood, clearly abandoned. But as we looked back at our window, a single, small, dirty fingerprint had appeared on the outside of the glass, and next to it, written backwards in the condensation, was a single, terrifying name: Sarah. We hadn't been watching the ghost in the monitor had been watching us, and it knew the name of our friend who passed away last summer.